Something dramatic happened last weekend. For the first time, after years of studies and legal battles and controversy, a state contractor dropped an herbicide chemical into 2 bays in Lake George. But the chemical, called prosellaCOR, has already been used to kill the invasive Eurasian water milfoil on other Adirondack lakes, with little to no controversy. Applying prosellaCOR in Chateaugay Lake on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Long Run Wealth, an SEC-registered investment advisor in Lake Placid, providing comprehensive wealth management, retirement, and financial planning solutions. LongRunWealth.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Wednesday, July 3rd. First up, state police charged 7 current and former U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers yesterday in a grand larceny scheme. Police say the officers misappropriated federal government accounts and union funds while executive board members of the National Treasury Employees Union, Chapter 138 in Champlain. They allegedly double-billed the 2 organizations for official travel and took cash advances. 6 of the officers were charged with felony grand larceny. The 7th faces a misdemeanor larceny charge. All were released on their own recognizance. The Clinton County District Attorney's Office is prosecuting the case. A proposed large-scale commercial solar development in Canton is nearing final approval from the state. St. Lawrence Valley reporter Catherine Wheeler has more.
New York State's Office of Renewable Energy Siting says EDF Renewables needs to make a few changes to its draft permit, but the state says there's no need for further hearings on the Rich Road solar project. EDF is proposing to build a 240-megawatt commercial solar project in Canton, just southwest of the village on Route 11. It would be the single largest solar development in St. Lawrence County so far. Canton's solar attorney Bill Buchan says ORES's update wasn't unexpected.
We had hoped that there would be some accommodations to the issues that we raised. For example, the battery safety issues. All of those issues were deemed to be insignificant from the ORES standpoint. So none of the things that we asked to be heard will go any further.
The proposed battery storage site on the development is one of a few environmental and safety concerns that some residents and local governments raised. That's after 3 battery storage sites in New York caught on fire last year. They say if there was an accident, it could put a strain on already limited emergency services in the area. But others say the development will help in the pursuit of more renewable energy to fight against climate change and bring in some revenue to the community. Buchan says outside of the state's permitting process, there are still a few things EDF and the town have to agree upon, like a road use agreement.
There is also a payment in lieu of taxes agreement that's been proposed through the St. Lawrence County IDA, and a host community benefit agreement, which is between the town and EDF. Those issues will all remain under discussion by the parties.
The state will continue to process the permit. It's expected to be approved. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio.
All the headlines about an invasive weed called Eurasian water milfoil and a chemical herbicide to treat it have been centered around Lake George. But a number of other Adirondack communities have already used prosellaCOR on their lakes. Today we head to one of those places, Chateaugay Lake in the northern Adirondacks. That community has been fighting milfoil since 2007, and it applied prosellaCOR for the first time last Friday. Amy Feiereisel was on hand, and here's her story.
Right next to the hamlet of Lion Mountain is Chateaugay Lake. It's big, 3,000 acres, and favored by boaters and kayakers. Like many popular Adirondack lakes, it has a big problem with Eurasian water milfoil, the invasive aquatic plant.
It will grow to the surface and develop a mat on the surface, so that affects the oxygen exchange. So it's bad for the water, the habitat.
That's Mary Johnson, the president of the Chateaugay Lake Foundation, which she started in 2007 to combat the spread of milfoil. Back then, it was particularly bad around the boat launch, where we're standing today, watching people put in their pontoons and paddleboards.
It was clogged out in front of this boat launch. It was clogged around the sandbar where people go from here to spend the day.
In 2007, about 200 acres of the lake were infested with milfoil. A Paul Smith's College study estimated it would cost $1.5 million to manually remove it from the whole lake. The foundation couldn't afford that, so it started by ripping it out by hand in shallow, high-traffic areas.
We began with hand harvesting by scuba divers and laying benthic mats at the boat launch, where we're here today.
They'd hoped to then expand the hand harvesting to reach more of the shoreline.
But we found that we have had to repeatedly hand harvest the same areas over and over.
The milfoil moved faster than they could. The amount of milfoil in the lake has nearly tripled since they began. That's why today, Chateaugay Lake is getting its first treatment of a chemical herbicide called prosellaCOR. It joins about a half dozen other Adirondack lakes to do so. prosellaCOR works by mimicking a plant hormone specific to milfoil.
And it causes the plant to grow so rapidly the stems elongate, the stems collapse, and the plant dies.
Minerva Lake, which used the herbicide in 2020, has seen significant success, with almost total dieback of Eurasian milfoil and very little regrowth over the last 3 years. Chateaugay Lake is bigger and more infested, so today's treatment of 95 acres is meant to be the first of several, says Johnson.
It's not a permanent solution, and we would plan to extend the period of that it's effective by checking and reharvesting where we see regrowth. But we do think that it will help us and be more cost effective.
There's a small boat out on the lake driving back and forth applying the prosellaCOR. There's a big tank on the bottom of the boat where Glenn Sullivan puts the herbicide. Then he draws water in from the lake, it mixes with the prosellaCOR, and it goes back out.
And then there's an iPad there with the map of the sites on there so I can follow that. And then usually in big sites like this, I'll break it up into sections so that I know that, 5 gallons goes in this section, 5 gallons goes in that section. Just makes it easier.
Sullivan is a biologist and has worked in lake management for over 30 years, including applying herbicides and algicides. He's treating 6 lakes this year in the Adirondacks with prosellaCOR. He did Minerva Lake in 2020.
How does it compare to other herbicides and chemicals?
It's used at a much lower dose than most of them, than most of the aquatic ones. A lot of people were using Renovate before this. Loon Lake and Lake Luzerne in the Adirondacks used Renovate, which is triclopyr, you used it at about 2,000 parts per billion, and this we're using at about 6 parts per billion. So it's dramatically different.
prosellaCOR has been deemed safe for plants, wildlife, and humans by the EPA, the European Union, and Canada. The argument made against the herbicide by environmental groups is that it's still relatively new, and you can't predict what unforeseen consequences might arise from its use. It's important to note that the Chateaugay Lake community is pretty on board. The EPA collected public comment as part of the permit application, and 120 out of 132 letters expressed support for using prosellaCOR. Mary Johnson says they've done a lot of public education.
We try to get out there to explain what we're doing, why it's important. But more and more people are recognizing the problem of invasive species, and as they see it spread along the shoreline and, in front of their camps, they get even more motivated.
Johnson says the Lake Association recognizes the potential risk of using any herbicide, but has also had to consider their limited resources and the known impacts of Eurasian milfoil if it continues to spread.
Because it's bad for the health of the lake, it's bad for oxygen exchange, it's bad for the native plants, the native fish and waterfowl.
As Glenn Sullivan heads back out onto the lake to apply more prosellaCOR, Johnson says she hopes this new tactic will finally allow them to get ahead of the milfoil for the first time in 17 years. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio on Chateaugay Lake.
We have more news all the time and through the weekend on our website, ncpr.org. Story of the Day will be off tomorrow and Friday for the Independence Day weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Music today by the Saranac Project of Saranac Lake and Evan Veenstra of Gananoque, Ontario. Have a super Independence Day weekend. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.